That's really what this world was created for. And what that implies is, if it is perfect for awakening in a dualistic world, it means it's perfect for falling asleep too. So we're always, before every impression, at the threshold of being awake or being asleep. The mechanicity of life can be a rhythm that can lull us to sleep or bring us to dance. And the essence of how we take in life and understanding what our purpose is makes the difference. Just like in the great saying, it's the poison or medicine, the dose determines. And the same is true with the consciousness. The application and the amount is what determines. And so that's the essence of what we're going to talk about. It may seem as a harsh statement, but the purpose of the Gnostic teachings have been always here to point to the fact that this world isn't perfect. It's here to help us to awaken our consciousness. And with that is given the teaching and the support to do that. And that's not always what everybody wants in a spiritual teaching. Because we can get involved in wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to make our home a better place, and those are all great things, especially if we have at the core the understanding that what we're here for, and not everybody is here to awaken their consciousness. So in that, sometimes the Gnostic teachings don't resonate. And because in some ways it connects and communicates through all spiritual traditions in one way or another, and at the same time being connected and similar, it's also very different in certain ways. And so we stress certain things because in our lineage and in this teaching, they have been presented and given to us for the purpose of not making us better people, but making us awake. And as we've said before, the relationship of awakening is like a light that spreads out, and it just doesn't illuminate the good things, it illuminates up and down simultaneously. And that's mandatory for us to be able to awaken our consciousness. We need to be able to see where we are on the tree of life, where we are inside of ourselves in every situation, so that we have that choice or the ability to exercise the free will. And the Gnostic teachings, free will is something very particular. It resides in the human soul. So we all have free will. But as I said, in a perfect world that is perfect for awakening and is perfect for falling asleep, that free will then over time gets conditioned to repeat, conditioned to relive the things that we want to relive, and also relive the things we don't want to relive because we want those to be over, or whatever forms of attachment that repeat those things. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to have a practice very shortly, and we'll also end with a practice so that we can go in depth into the relationship of what we call subject-object location. It's a state of being to facilitate exactly that, the awakening of consciousness. So,
welcome, Wendy.
I don't know if we can do that. We can do that. We can do it.
Well, they can all see who's here anyway if people can hear me.
Hello.
Hi.
So a little reintegration. So you see on this image that when we're talking about the tree of life, which is what the Kabbalah really illustrates and communicates, it's essentially four trees on top of each other. Sometimes they're just right on top, sometimes they're partially on top as they unfold. And as you see in this slide, the relationship of these four worlds, and as we've said before, it's very important to understand that the mysterious Sephirah of Da'at, which is right here, and successively down the central column of the tree of life, from the first world, that Sephirah is receiving directly from unmanifested light as wisdom, as knowledge, and then it moves that down through the tree, and through the creative organs of that tree, the Yasod, which we'll talk about tonight, it becomes the Da'at, or the knowledge of the next world, and so on and so on. So this first world, we're going to talk top down, and then we'll go from the bottom up again. The first world is the world of Atzilut, and that word Atzilut is a Hebrew word, and it means proximity. Proximity because it's right on the threshold of the light of the absolute. And in the absolute is absolute everything. It's everything that could be, everything that would be, everything that may be, everything that was. And it's also none of those things because it is all of those things. It's a very abstract world, but that's where everything comes from. And so we've talked about that a little bit before, and we'll continue. So in that world, it says that the being, and we say the being is God, the being, or God for us, acts directly in that realm. So someone was communicating, and there's this phrase that comes from the Bible in different ways that says, "Be still and know that I am the Lord." Now, that's a practice that we can do and try to connect. But if we were connected, or let's say in the world of Atzilut, that "be still and know that I am the Lord" would mean we would be absolutely still and know that what creation is. And it would be awe-inspiring, so awesome, or this term that comes, knowing the fear of God, which is kind of a misrepresentation. It's a respect or an awe, to stand on the threshold of everything, to feel absolute love, absolute security, absolute bliss. And the story goes for us, the reason we don't have that experience in a continual way is because it was so awesome. I'm going to make the joke that I know how to make, but it was so awesome that we lost ourselves, and we were perplexed. We didn't know, what is this that I'm feeling? What is this I'm experiencing? And because of that, we went in lower and lower realms, because the quest is to know, to understand. And in a creation built upon duality, like we've talked about, in order to understand something, we have to experience duality in some way. But the whole creation is continually trying to find balance, And when perfect balance and perfect harmony is found, we ascend, we return, we go back. Because in order to live in that most elevated, abstract space, there needs to be complete and utter balance. No lack, no question, no wondering, no need, because those things arise inside of ourselves and keep us from being in absolute peace. So that creation unfolds, and the second world is Bria, which means creation, and it's the worlds of systems and patterns, organizations, scenarios, structures. And in that realm, God acts through archangels, and we'll talk more about that. We've kind of not been really mystical about this, and I think that that's very important. We're gonna try and bridge those two next week, because we're going to look at the world of Bria next week. From there comes the world of formation. So it emanates creates and informs. And a phrase that's very powerful, the introductory line of Genesis states, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was void and without form. So that tells us that it's beyond, it has descended below the world of formation, because in the world of formation, the forces of above are trying to form and organize it according to those patterns. And we've received those elements inside of us as thoughts and emotions. But there's a mixture, because from there also then unfolded this world of Asya, or the world of action, the world of matter. And esoterically, in the Bible, the story of Revelation, of the Apocalypse, speaks of the 7 churches in Asia. And esoterically, that's a point to the fact that it is in relation to the 7 churches in Asia. And in esoteric teachings, when we look at something that relates to the earth, it's almost always related psychologically to the individual. That we are the earth, the philosophical earth. We are that earth that's void and without form. Because the purpose of this creation is for the awakening of consciousness and for the creation of human beings. We've been created in the form of a human being, but we haven't been formed or shaped totally from the inside out as that. And that's what takes place in this world of Yetzirah. And as I said, in this material world of Asya, where God acts through the elements, the planets, the zodiac, the chakras, because those 7 churches are directly related to the 7 chakras of Asya, or this physical body. And in the physical body, in the world of Asya, the tree of life is related directly to the physical body. And that central column of the tree is our spine. And the spine gives blossom to these faculties or additional senses for perceiving. But in the physical body, those chakras are actually the glands of secretion, and why we began to work in the transmutation of the sexual matter, because that's the finest product produced by this physical body. And to work from the material back to the spiritual, we have to etherize that matter. And that the glands of secretion and excretion that work with hormones, and those hormones are right on the precipice of the threshold. Just like I said, absolute's right on the proximity of the absolute. Those hormones are right on the precipice of the etherical reality. And then why at the subatomic level, that the particles come in and out of this physical reality. Where do they go? They go into the etheric world of Yetzirah. And so the work of the Gnostic with that matter is to return it back to where it came, and to be grateful that we've had the ability to experience that. As we spoke about, gratitude is so important, especially in these times, to really define ourselves not for the difficulties in our life, the pains and the struggles, but define ourselves by the well-being, the things that have come to us that through grace. Now, as we said, this relationship, and now you see the tree of life here, and as a single tree of life, side by side with the 4 worlds, each of these 4 worlds corresponds to a level or a triangle on this tree of life. They're closely color-coded, artistically color-coded. And this fallen Sephirah of Malkuth, or the kingdom which we find ourselves in, which is nature and the state that we are. In the Gnostic teachings, they talk about the fall of Sophia. In this, it's called the Queen, and we'll look at that a little bit. As we said, in some way, there's polarity, masculine and feminine, throughout the tree, and we'll continue to talk about that. And that's necessary to find balance. So you see these three poles, these three pillars, the central column here, which is very important, and in the Wallacea, it represents the spine. And then the pillar of grace or mercy on this side, and the pillar of justice or severity on this side. We say that this is the right side, as we talked about, it's positive. And in relation, this is negative. This is masculine, this is feminine. Not negative as denoting bad, it's just a relationship, because all the tree is in relationship. But every sephira itself is giving and receiving masculine and feminine. But we could say in some way the whole tree is more or less feminine, because it is the receptor or the receiver of all the impressions. And it relates to matter. But we would say at the top of the tree is spirit and the bottom is matter, but they're two poles of the same thing. And as we said, that everything in this created world is trying to find balance. The balance is always in this central column. And we looked at last week the atom, the fundamental building block of our matter is composed of positive, negative, neutral, and the most simple atom, that of hydrogen, and its most simple state is one proton and one electron, just a positive and a negative combined. But commonly it's expressed, and as it creates, it has in its core not just a proton, it has a neutron that stabilizes and balances and works to create a relative level of harmony. Relative because it's always moving. Electrons are jumping from atom to atom. It's what goes on at that level. But it's even more crazy that in a world that we live in that's built on this, we know so little. I mean, we could look and say we know so much, but the deeper we go into mysticism and the deeper we go into science, the more questions we answer, the more questions we find. The more problems we solve, we actually find that the more problems we create, because that's the world that we live in. So we could get distracted trying to make this world better, but it was created for a purpose. We don't have to believe that that's the purpose, but from the Gnostic point of view, the purpose is for us to awaken our consciousness, to define ourselves for the being, for the purpose that we're here, so that everything that I have, good or bad, in my body, in my environment, in my relationships, everything is a reflection of divinity and my relation to that. So the gratitude that I have myself is thank you for all that I have, for everything that I have, that all that I'm able to experience and process. Now, this unfolding, as you see at the top of the tree, it comes together, the right and left columns to the center in Keter, separates, unfolds, and then comes back together in this, what we say fallen sephira, because it's not connected. It doesn't have three forces, three sephira balancing it. It's all in one. So the struggle for balance is in every atom, in every organization. And in the Gnostic teachings, we say that this realm that we live in is actually governed by 48 laws. Those 48 laws are working in a structure that's come from above and down into more complex experiences. And when we identify, and by identify I mean losing myself, forgetting my purpose, whether it's to be conscious or not, whether it's to, drive my car, whether it's to communicate with someone I care about. Whenever I lose my purpose and I'm not aware of actually what I'm doing, and because I become identified with a feeling of being angry or upset or ecstatic or zany, we were talking about grandkids. That grandkid doesn't do much, but we expect great things. We expect big things from him. No, but we have several other, and while I was also there, our other granddaughter, I hate to make this about kids, but I'm a grandparent, so you guys just have to listen. You're just lucky I'm not bringing out the pictures. Okay, but the other, she's 9, and she's into a lot of things. Some gymnastics, kind of self-taught gymnastics, but she does these cartwheels, and she'll just all around the yard. I can only do 12 in a row. She made it to 16. She just keeps doing it. It's like that. There's just so much energy and force and unbridled condition. So, but those things are inside of us. Even when we get excited, we get identified. We lose, and I'm going to talk about why that and how that operates. But what happens as a consequence to this, we have these what are called what are they called? The three poisons. Mm-hmm. Symbolized by the rooster, the serpent, and the boar. And to boil it down, it's craving, aversion, and ignorance. And of course, ignorance is the inverse or the opposite of gnosis or knowledge. To know, ignorance is to not know. To not know. So we aren't aware of all of these things that are going on. And so we crystallize and recreate elements through the forces of Yetzirah, which is formation, pushing down into the physical world. We then identify and we create things that are even more complicated than the 48 laws. They're ruled by 96 laws or 184 laws, depending on the level of our identification. And then that we have this pull from wanting to be spiritually connected, but we're digging holes into our own philosophical earth, and it keeps us generally in the middle most of the time, in the middle, because it's relatively balanced until we get too overburdened by these creations that we've done, and we get pulled away. And so we could say that from the world of Asiya, that when we die, we leave the world of Asiya. And because sickness or whatever, old age or whatever catches up with us. But that in itself implies imperfection, though we take it as a given, like, oh, yeah, things die. Well, things die in this world. So what we want to do is climb the tree and go to a world that doesn't die. That if we had a feeling that we were so happy and it never went away. I talk about this in this world, how terrible it would be if nothing died in this world. It's necessary for things to die in this world. Or we wouldn't have any room to move. Now, so this imbalance is in this world of Asiya, and our work is to rebalance, relatively speaking, because when we come to a level of balance, the natural state is buoyancy and we float. I know when kids, adults, anyone learning to swim, right, one of the things they try to do is teach you to float, because it's like, at least you can chill out, but you have to be perfectly still. Sherry, I don't know if you've ever done this, even in a bathtub, where you take a deep breath and your body actually lifts off the first time I was like, whoa, that's the way it should be. but it's just, it's like, so if we can just be perfectly still and breathe, we would float. But if we're dropped into a sea, it's very hard to be perfectly still and relax. So the same thing is, if we can just be perfectly still and equanimous in this reality, we will float, we will rise. So identification pulls us down. So I want to go over this core teaching for us, which is the teaching of subject, object, location. And so you see this reflection in this world of Asiya, this square, this cube, this world of 3 dimensions. Now, what's fascinating and probably with some mind-bending technology, you could supersede this, but go with me on this. What's fascinating is when you see a three-dimensional cube, you're only able to see three sides at one time. But you know, in order for that to be there, there has to be three other sides. Those three other sides relate to the fourth and fifth dimension in the world of Asiya, these three spheres. And in relation to that, and furthermore, there's these three spheres of the soul, the spirit, the divine soul, and the human soul. That's actually what is supporting the back of this, because the three faces that we're actually seeing are these three spheres. In order for us to really perceive three dimensions, we've been gifted. We've been gifted what are called in Gnosis the three brains. We have, just like I said, in order for us to triangulate and perceive something, we need two ears, two eyes, two nostrils to kind of orient ourselves in duality. And that's great. But in order to perceive three dimensions, we need this triangulation as well in our consciousness. Though we've got it kind of toned down, but you will see the more that you push to awaken your consciousness and perceive in these three dimensions, the more lucidity, the more crisp, the more amazing things actually become. Now, other animals don't possess all of that. Some animals can only perceive two dimensions and some only one dimension. It's hard for us to figure out what that actually would be like. But for us, we can perceive three dimensions because we have these three centers inside of ourselves. So right now, this is a great opportunity when you're seated at your computer or your telephone or wherever you are. And I like to do this whether we were together or separate through the internets. We're all in this internet together. So you don't have to get in a special posture. You don't have to put your tea down, because that's the way that this should be carried out. The practice of subject-object location is to become aware of yourself, being yourself in the place that you're in this point in time. So, first, I find it easiest to notice what you're looking at. And we have a screen in front of us. Not that I'm trying to hypnotize everybody by staring at a screen, but look at the screen. In your attention, you notice your attention goes out and aware in the moment. Don't let your mind go, oh, that's a pretty color orange, or, you know, can I actually see all those four trees? Don't notice, notice those things, but don't identify with them. Meaning something comes up, don't go, That's the first stage of identification, is looking away, psychologically. So try to keep your awareness on the object, your objective, paying attention. Now that can also take in what you're hearing. Now the beauty is, as you start to see the dimensionality that happens, is you're watching a screen, your ears are picking up things that aren't just on the screen, unless you have headphones on, but around you. So let it take in your awareness of what you're hearing. This is your object. And you might notice, what are the objects that are in your hand if you're holding your tea, or a pencil if you're taking notes, or a pad. Notice the objects. And your objective is paying attention. The reason I like to begin with the object is because from there it's easier to expand. So now you're looking at the screen, and imagine from your awareness, you're pulling back inside of yourself. And there's a lot of ways to do this. You could imagine that what you're looking at is producing a light, or there's a point between you and this screen that's pointing both ways. You can actually imagine that you're behind yourself, seeing yourself see the screen. And as you work with this, all of those options are good to play around with. But what I like to do simply is see what I'm looking at, and then pull back inside myself and perceive or feel what I'm seeing. Now, not feeling like with your fingers, right? But feeling like, what is the impact? What am I feeling? And this becomes, when we get to the end and we give the meditation practice, we'll use this a little more, because the feeling portion is, seeing is easy. We can say, oh, I see. And no matter how many words I use, keep doing the practice. You're still focusing. The feeling is, I may feel happy or sad or uncomfortable, but the reality, the real element of this is to feel and be open to whatever I feel, which means that a big portion of that is not feeling anything. It's really the looking. So now you're looking, and that becomes really important, because the mind, through the senses, or the mind itself through memory, wants to be distracted. And to really acquire comprehension and gnosis and knowledge, we have to have at least 50% of ourselves open to, I don't know what I'm experiencing. That makes us receptive. So you're looking, you're perceiving, and you're feeling its impact. The feeling is feeling yourself as the subject. And in that now, with your attention ahead, and pulling back and perceiving yourself, perceiving the screen, notice the tension or relaxation in the body, the clothing, how it subtly touches in some places, the air that may be moving, your feet crossed or touching the ground. Feel the weight of you. And again, let's not categorize or interpret or add to what we're perceiving. But if that does happen, if you feel ashamed, or you feel beautiful because you see your reflection in the screen, or anything that you feel, notice that. Anything that you perceive, you notice. But as the exercise, make it so that whatever arises in your mind or in your emotions, your attention doesn't go like this. Your attention can go like this. The key is to expand, so that we're not pushing anything away, but we're not letting it distract us or detour us from what we're aware of, which at this point is what we're perceiving with our senses, what we're doing, and ourselves as the perceiver. The object, the subject. I am. As if a big bell rings, am. And try to keep that going to the next breath, to the next thought that may come to try to take you away. Again, as I said, we're here to awaken consciousness, which means we don't push anything away, but at the same time, we don't let it take us away. So I am here. We go to the third dimension of this practice, which is now our awareness of the object that we're looking at, the objective that we're doing, the subject as the doer now drops into now, here. I am here. And we notice we jump here, we jump there, we jump. Our consciousness is conditioned to be distracted. It's conditioned from memory, from associations. And all of that comes from the world of Yetzirah, formation, previous formations that we have inside of our self, so that we can reconcile. That's the third force. So in any moment that we are perceiving and then we receive something, that's the first force, the second force, and the third force is the relationship of those two. We'll talk more about that later, but right now, imagine as you're seeing yourself seeing, and your awareness expands to take in the atmosphere. I don't have to look at the picture over there to know there's a picture over there. This is attention with awareness. And again, we're conditioned, we're relatively asleep, meaning it's very difficult to maintain this state of attention with awareness for long periods of time. So the first thing that we do is we try to do it as many times as we can. But serious. As many times as you can, because consciousness is measured in frequency, duration, and amplitude. The frequency, how frequently do we do it? The duration, how long are the periods through which we hold that? And amplitude, how deep, how profound is the consciousness? Because what we're speaking about in the tree of life, in the relationship, no matter how abstract or fascinating or fanciful, I don't want to say that. Fantastic. The information can and is, it was all perceived through someone's consciousness. It wasn't made up. And because of that, we know that it aligns with many other traditions and teachings with different languages and different symbols that have, in essence, the same meaning. That's why we use other traditions to support this, to fill in the gaps, because not everything has been written down. Some was written here, some was written there. So in this way now, we are experiencing as we were meant to experience, with three dimensions to our reality, this physical reality. We get confused and think that three dimensions is only a spatial relationship. But it's a conscious relationship.
So that's a practice that doesn't end.
It doesn't end. Yeah, I'm not going to ring a bell. No bell. You don't get a bell for that.
Also, our meditation bell, of course, is in the BC Gnostic Center in Vancouver.
Both of them.
Yeah, two of them. Yeah.
Three of them. No, two of them.
Two of them. Yes. So we're using our phones for bells in these virtual classes.
Yeah, I don't know if you've noticed. It's just not that good. But so keep the practice, keep going, and this is our invitation. We're not in person, but our invitation is always. This is a space when you enter into it to be as conscious as possible. It's not about remembering everything that was said. If we get one thing that impacts our consciousness, that is magical. And that's one of the relationships of the world of Yetzirah and Asiya as it relates, because we have these three brains, and one of the elements is that the brain gets overloaded and it shuts down. And I could be guilty of shutting down many brains, and I apologize for that. But it's actually on you guys. It's on all of us. I have to be careful about blah blah blah, as my grandkids say. But we are all responsible for our consciousness and understanding what's coming in, what's going out. And so when we come together, it is a place to be as conscious as we can. As Judith has said before, that there's, hundreds of hours outside, minutes outside of this small period of class. So let's take advantage of this to be as conscious as we can be. And
Dozens of hours.
Dozens. There was probably a day when dozens was a lot. Dozens. So back to conclude in this relationship of the world of Asiya, and how we misunderstand how science believes, that it knows enough to get things done, but in the essence of what are going on, like for instance, I heard some well-known physicist talking about, it appears that 90% of the reality the universe that we're here is composed of this dark matter, and we don't actually know what it does, but that doesn't matter. To me, that's shocking. Because we know enough to do what we're doing, and as I said, and unfortunately, we know enough to do things that cause more difficulties. And forgive me if I sound like I'm bashing on the world. Actually, I realized as I was thinking about this, Gnostics had gotten that rap back in the old days. They hated the world, but it's not as much that. Let's continue this, and we'll go on to other more beautiful, sublime topics. But for instance, gravity. The apple is one of those symbols of gravity. Isaac Newton saw an apple, or used the analogy of an apple falling from a tree, and calculated its speed, its velocity. Now, what's amazing that he did not do, or he just kind of figured, well, I'm not going to say anything about this, but I don't know if you guys know this, but outside of wind resistance, which certain objects have, like a feather carries wind, every object falls at the same speed. Every object is equally drawn towards the center of this planet. For instance, an apple and an elephant. If the wind resistance was taken away, they fall at exactly the same speed. That is an anomaly for the mind. It's like, how could that be? We don't understand. Well, the Gnostic master Samael tells us something very beautiful about this relationship of gravity. And when you hear this, it makes perfect sense why everything is treated exactly equal. Because gravity in the world of Asiya is a law that has been concretized or materialized for physical matter, but gravity, the power of gravity is love. So the love of this creation is equal for every individual. Now, that might not sound very scientific, but we don't have to be completely scientific. We're esoteric. That means that most of what we're going to talk about isn't physical. So we have to,
Different science.
it's a different science. And actually, Gnosis is very scientific, but it's actually not just a science, it's an art. And so that actually flexes the boundaries and most, and why the Renaissance was, all this information came out, because the scientists were doctors, were artists, they were all the same. They had a way of viewing and perceiving the world and with consciousness. And we would say that any great advancement in the human constructs were done through consciousness. And so another anomaly, if we're looking at this apple, which I invite you to do in self-observation, in this division of attention, you would probably say the apple is red. And interestingly, throughout all traditions, there's this relationship to the physical world being the world of Maya or illusion. And this is scientifically proven as well, because though we look at this apple and say the apple's red, actually what it's doing is reflecting red, meaning as the light descends from abstract space and comes through, another thing that Isaac Newton did, showed the prism and the relationships of white light in the 7 rays. We'll maybe talk about that in the future, but that in all the different tonalities, that light is penetrating into this apple, and this apple is able to integrate every color except red. So in reality, that apple is every other color, but it projects red out. Now, why is that interesting? Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? It's interesting. I mean, it's like, wow, that means that everything that we ever look at is not exactly what we think it is. So science says this is a world of illusion. But what that means to the individual that wants to awaken consciousness, that's trying to integrate light, it means that what I cannot assimilate, I project. So in the world of matter, I have the ability to see myself outside of myself. So I'm projecting, we are all projecting the elements that we cannot harmonize or integrate in a scenario out into the environment, so that we can then take the first, the second force, and with consciousness comprehend the relationship. So back to the exercise that we're doing, and we're noticing that something arises in a conversation that stimulates and activates something inside of me, and a pain comes out, that if I can maintain this consciousness that I've got my attention divided and the pain comes out, and if my consciousness is perfect and pure, there's a trinity that's created in that moment that can impact my view of myself and allow me to awaken to something that I was not aware of before. But generally what happens is this thing comes up and this hurts, and so I don't even want to look at it, and I project something out mechanically instead of in the way the world was constructed. I project it out, and I can keep doing this because I don't want to see, I don't want to feel the things that I didn't want in the first place. So this pattern begins. And then I begin to fall asleep with my own creations, that this person's negative, these people are like this, I don't like that color, I don't like, or sometimes even I don't like myself, our own psychology, which we'll look at next week, how this starts to unfold into our own, different states. Like I said that there's 12 types in relation to the zodiac. There are 7 psychologies fundamentally in relation to the law of creation. I'll show in Yetzirah how that happens, or why that is on a creative level. And then there's three different types. Some of us are more in the mind, some are more in the heart, some are more in the body of action, or the solar plexus. So
not usually the heart.
yeah,
So we
no,
develop
okay,
that.
right.
Mhm.
No, I said action. Oh, the heart. Oh, yeah. Right. So, so now, how did this creation actually come to be so that we can have this? Because it's consistently trying to create this environment. If we say that the creator, represented by Keter at the very top, and we in the very bottom are the creation, then there is a balancing element in the middle. And so this takes place, and you see that this Father, Son, and Mother Earth, we see here in the middle a balancing point. But this creation comes through time and through the infinite and out on different octaves, so that from first it creates an infinite of all the stars and planets. And then that relationship then creates galaxies, organizations into galaxies, and then into solar systems, and into planets, and into bodies. Because the relationship in Asya, God works through material elements or terrestrial bodies. And that this central point on the tree of life, which is the central column of equilibration, in the center is related to the world of natural causes, or the causal plane, or the world of the human soul, which is the balancing point between spirit and matter. So for us to keep the attention divided like that, and maintain that, when we comprehend something, it's because we've experienced it at this causal plane. But in the realm of creation, so as we said, this tree represents all of creation and all these different dimensions of consciousness, so that in this level, in order to have this creation, it unfolds and creates this relationship of the Father as a creator and the Son as a solar system. And the midpoint is balanced by dot, and then that midpoint becomes a new beginning, so that then we see that this relationship of the Son in the central point of the tree of life, and generally in traditions, the Son is related to the Father, is related to God as the Father, as the creator. So the Son is the Father, and the earth is the mother. Now, something very fascinating and something very beautiful happens in this relationship of the Father, Son, and the Mother Earth. Because, as we said, that the law of gravity is a variant or a representation of the physical world of love. So in every solar system, from the central point of that solar system, God the Father is radiating love into creation. And that love for the Mother Earth does something very fascinating. It produces water so that life can be born. That's what's so unique about this planet and this relationship, is the waters. And in science it says, when they're looking for life in the world, the first thing that in the stars, the first thing they look for is a planet with water. We even believe that the first life came out of water. But esoterically, to create a human being, we have to come out of the waters. And so this relationship is very, very amazing, because the Sun, composed primarily of hydrogen, that prime element, is radiating love to hold this relationship of attraction between the earth, which its atmosphere is oxygen. There's a sexual relationship to produce between the hydrogen and the oxygen to produce water, H2O. It's composed of hydrogen and oxygen. And then that water then allows for the elements to give birth, to be born, all the elements that we have. Now, we also have the moon that also governs and radiates or mechanically controls the waters, the fluids on the planet Earth. I don't want to get too much into that, but that is why we're in the perfect position to receive the love of the Father and to give birth through the waters in the physical realm, but also in the interior physical body. We have the waters of life, and as the ancient teachings say, and in the book of Genesis as well, but in Egypt and many others, that then from this relationship of the Spirit moving over the waters, the first dry land appears, and that's the first element of the human being that comes out. But the moon counterbalances that and creates a mechanical relationship that allows us to also fall asleep. And so the conversion and the working with the sun and the moon is the first alchemical process. It's fascinating that the circumference and the distance of the sun, mathematically the ratio for the circumference and the distance of the moon to the earth is identical, so that they, relatively identical, so they appear to be the same size. So we have an equal choice. The being and awakening, or desire and fascination and hypnotism and sleep. And so in order for this process to be possible for us to awaken consciousness, there has to be free will, which means anybody can do whatever they want. And because of the love of the Creator, we are going to receive the consequences of those in time. Not always apparent right now. How come good things happen to bad people? Well, we just don't have the scope and the scale to see that. We don't know that maybe that something terrible happened to that person in a past life, and something terrible will happen in the future. Our scope and scale is so small, the consciousness understands this at a bigger level. So this relationship of the love and gravity and attraction is fundamental in understanding how things are formed in this creation. And not an electrical physicist, but an electrician, so I can speak to electricity a little bit, but we can relate the being, or God, we say the being because it's that, or some people say spirit, but we say the being because it's intimate and it's directly related to us. It is God for us. Atman. Or Keter, just depending on which part of the tree, Atman, the true self. And we'll talk more about Atman next week. But the being, in this scenario, you see these two magnets, right? But the being is not the magnet. The being, or God, is the electromagnetic force, or the force of attraction. Just like we would say, someone might say coffee, or that's a dumb movie, TV is the devil. That idea that things or objects are innately evil in some way, and some are good. But in reality, the devil is not the thing. The devil is the attachment to the thing. And because we're asleep, we lose our awareness towards the thing and lose ourself. And we say, this thing is bad. That person said something terrible, or that person said something awesome. We separate ourselves and we act from our own consciousness and identify and lose ourselves in what we experience. And the way that consciousness awakens, or this human being is actually formed in the world of Yetzirah, is the relationship of this electromagnetic force of the etheric world, that when magnets or an object and a magnet are held at a distance, it produces this field that then moves matter and energy up or down relative to the polarity. So in this, we can see this relationship in the physical world, which is in Malkuth right here. Something takes place, and my attention, I'm more or less this magnet, or you are more or less this magnet or a piece of material, and the polarity dictates, oops, sorry about that. That was not supposed to happen. We had some science that was going to happen. The, I don't know, that'd be terrible if we don't get to see it, but the, hold on everyone. Not sure what's happening here. Well, what I was going to show you is that the, let's see, I'll go one more time, go right back. I'm not going to do it because obviously something's wrong, but the polarity of the magnet creates an energetic flow that either rises up or goes down. Now, as long as that proportion is held between the two objects or the two magnets in that field, which is that field of attraction, which is gravitational in nature, which is love in essence. So when we're attracted to something, which is wonderful and beautiful to be attracted, but to hold the relationship of self-observation to keep myself from forgetting myself allows the energy to move and rise up. When I identify and completely attach, it stops all movement of flow. The field goes away, the field collapses in that sense. So the relationship, we're not going to get to see it, but the energy flows up or flows down. Now, the polarity is when I attach and say mine, or yours, or this, or that, and don't have this relationship of thank you, or seeing the being in this, because that's the additional element that we need to apply when we're doing this self-observation or subject-object location is to use the imagination now as I'm looking, whatever I'm looking at, and feeling and perceiving the atmosphere around me, in that space, to have the heart open and understand that for every 3 dimensions of space that I experience, there's 3 other dimensions to hold it up, just like that cube. And that is Atman, Buddhi, Manas from the Eastern terms. It's our intimate spirit, the being. So to try to perceive, and part of that unknowing is that we say remembering the being is here. Without thinking, because it's beyond thinking. Thinking is a lower dimensional relationship. It's just trying to perceive, holding that awareness. Because the being is the element that provides the comprehension and reconciles our relationship to matter. If I get identified, the movement stops. If I'm polarized into mine, yours, and then I send that energy down, and then it creates, it materializes in lower dimensions, or materializes in this dimension, relative to those creative etheric waters. So now let's look a little bit about this formation of this creation that we're in through the world of Yetzirah. Now there's a book called the Sefer, which is book of Sefer Yetzirah, or the book of formation. And it tells how gods, the being, creates all that we see, forms all that we see through the Hebraic alphabet. And so that's the relationship of the Tarot, which we had in our previous course, which is an endless course because it just goes on, the information and knowledge that could be ascertained. But in a nutshell, I'm going to give you this that I think is just very fascinating, this relationship of the creation of Yetzirah. God said, let there be light. Well, this unfolds and communicates. As I said, we're at the center of the earth. And the first thing that happens, God gives forth what are called the three maternals, or the three mothers. These three primary letters, Aleph, which is the first, Shin, which is the second to the last, and Mem, which is in the middle. And they relate, and it says this in the book, to the element air, the element fire, and the element water. Because the purpose is to form this matter, this earth. And then comes the 7 double letters, which relates to the 7 planets, which is not that there aren't more planets, but it relates to the organization of matter, the law of the octave. Then the 12 elementals, which relate to the 12 zodiacal signs. Now, what's beautiful about this is how it relates to this tree of life, and because you look at it and you've seen it, but there's so much dimensionality to what it is. So in the beginning, the first law was one law, which was love. And as love radiates out, it gets fractured and it gets complicated as it descends. We don't have time to go into it completely, but we can perceive how trying to communicate love to somebody gets very complicated. It's not as easy to actually convey the emotion. I can use words and you can kind of get it. But in order for an individual to get it, they have to have it. They have to feel it. They have to understand it. So the first is the law of unity, which is love. But then as the tree manifests through those 10 sephiras, there's the laws that bind it together. So those 3 maternals relate to the 3 horizontal bars that form the tops or form parts of those 3 triangles. And that's the law of creation, remembering that they relate to those 3 elements, which we'll look at. Then that dictates the level of the tree, the levels. Then the structure of the tree is formed by the next 7 letters that are the 7 lines that go up and down or vertical, which provide the structure. So now you have a structure. And then, you guessed it, maybe you didn't guess it, but then the law of crystallization, or the law of 12, is the strength of the tree, which is the 12 diagonal lines on the tree of life. Now, we don't go deep into studying this path with that path because they're placed in different ways in different traditions and to illustrate different things. But the reality is there's 22 paths on the tree of life, which relates to the one law that, in its complete expression of the path to return, or the Torah, the royal path, which is the teaching on how to return back to unity.
There was a question early on, just as a word, gematria with a question mark, and so maybe it does relate enough to say a little bit about
right.
that.
Yes, and so as I said, we've simplified down, and maybe for some people it's like, oh, you're taking all the beauty out of it, or but gematria, there's different elements of the Kabbalistic tradition, and not obviously, well, obviously, yes, I am, I was, but that based on these 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, their system, each letter equals a number. And so gematria and different forms of gematria are utilizing each name, each sentence as some form of equation mathematically. As we said in the study of the Tarot, everything is mathematics. And the science of understanding the relationships of all of these letters. We don't get too much into that because, as I said, there's so much beautiful information, but we don't want to, you know, and if it's something that somebody really enjoys, that's fine, as long as we can do this without losing the essence of the purpose. And so I'm only touching on these things because, believe me, in the past, I've gotten blah, you know, blah, blah, blah. My granddaughter, you guys will all be going blah, 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 blah. So I, you know, if I had more time, I would love to study deeper into all of these things, but there's so many things that we can't all do. So gematria, and there's other forms of taking letters and maneuvering them around and forming other words, and acrostics and different orders of words, and reading words backwards and forwards, and then words that have the same number together. But we don't get too much into that. But I would love to talk about it separately if someone would like to talk about that. So now, why I mention this is because it relates to the laws. The laws are very important for us psychologically to work when we're talking about creation and organizing that creation, crystallizing that creation, and returning back to where we came. And I think it's just beautiful to touch that it's here. But the prime element I wanted to get to was that those three maternal letters, the Shin, Aleph, and Mem, relate to these three triangles. And in it, the three elements. So the top triangle relates to the relationship of fire and the element fire and wisdom, where in the middle relates to the air and the breath of life. And we talked about in the physical relationship, the lungs and the heart. And then the forces of the Holy Spirit, because we also showed this, each of these triangles is controlled by one of these three portions, and that the Father controls the fire and the wisdom in the head, in the mind, the Son in the heart with the element air, and the Holy Spirit through the waters in the sexual organs. And we showed that first relationship, but that triangle itself, the waters, relate to creation, and another element of this triangle is known as the magic triangle because it relates to realms of magic, where here relates to the ethics and teachings on ethics and real truth. And this is the top triangle is the Goic triangle. But today we're just going to look at the magic triangle in relation to what was called Hermetic magic, in relation to the mind, which is evoking and invoking and channeling and actually materializing. Much of what we've seen as the secret or some situation of fabricating and creating reality and manifesting things, which can be very fascinating. But again, from the point of view of the Gnostic, the idea is to not create things that further distract us from the purpose of awakening the consciousness. The more wonderful and beautiful things we have, the more diverted our awareness can be and trapped more into this world. It's not that we don't want beautiful things, but we work to awaken the consciousness and allow the being to give us what we need, instead of us trying to create and materialize what we want. So in the world of Hod, or the astral plane, is the world of ritual magic, which is also working to create things. In the world of Yasod, here is the vital world, in the world of elemental magic and understanding all the medicines of nature. And much of the difficulties that are happening in this world is because we've separated from this reality, and we're trying to create medicines which is magic without communion and communication with the intelligences of those plants and animals themselves. And we think, which is very much in the line of desire, that I find this element, this is the thing that's doing the work, I'm going to get rid of everything else. It's the inverse of holistic medicine. And now I'm going to reproduce this over and over and over. And that's how the medical industry works. And because of that, and it doesn't have the balancing of the elements inside the thing and the communication with the shaman or the doctor to the intelligence of that plant in the superior dimensions, it creates more problems. And that's why there's such a long list of side effects to every drug. It's because we don't understand the forces that we're working with. We just want this thing to be the way we want it. And we're so identified with this, we don't care, if you get some other disease or some other problem, because we'll create another pill to take care of that. And of course, we all have to decide which medicines or things to do, but we're just stating that there is a relationship of the intelligence of the plant itself to work the healing beyond just that element. So now, as these elements express themselves in the world of the physical reality, it's the element air, fire, water, and earth, but understanding that each of these elements has a psychological relationship. And if we understand the relationship of the awakening of the consciousness and God, the being, acts through terrestrial bodies and elements, psychologically, those impacts, those elements also have a psychological relationship to produce scenarios in our life so that we can awaken our consciousness. Every scenario has that dual nature. We can either awaken to something or go to sleep a little bit more. And as we said in relation to the mind, a big problem is we get overloaded with information and the mind shuts down. Or in the emotions, we have explosions of emotion and there isn't a mitigator. Things can go crazy in the emotional center. In the body, we have limits that are set, physical limits that put an end so that we don't waste all of our energy in one day, in one moment for 3 days or 4 days. But we would say that we waste more than we should. And that's what we call fornication, is using more energy to accomplish an objective than is necessary, basically. And many of the factors and the elements that happen later in life has to do with depleting those elements earlier in life or in earlier lives. So just something to reflect on. Why balance in harmony is so important. Now, as these elements play out, or as they come down in the world of Yetzirah, they're vibrations of ether, and those vibrations in the East are called Vayu, is the tattva, or the thatness, the energetic, the etheric element that then becomes air. Tehas is the vibration of the ether that in the physical world becomes fire. Apas is the vibration of ether that in the physical world becomes water. And Prithvi is the vibration of the material element of earth in the physical realm. And again, where we spoke last week, the necessity is working with the waters themselves. As we said, the Sephra Yasod means foundation. So if we're going to create a new individual, we have to have a foundation.
And that's the triangle.
And that's the triangle around here. And what I did here is show this relationship, because we talked about hydrogen, and we talked about oxygen, and we talked about water. The element that we need, of course, it's a threefold element, is fire. And fire is actually in water. The problem is physically we don't perceive it, because fire is the element that, the wisdom that unites them and holds them together, the third force. So we have hydrogen, we have oxygen, each of them extremely flammable, but fused together through fire, they're the antithesis of fire. So the work of the esotericists is to try to activate that fire, to extract the fire. And the transmutation that we were doing is that. And you can see this relationship of ocean, or the state, which produces the heat. And from your science classes, you may remember the mind is related to the element air and represents the oxygen, and the earth, the matter, is the fuel that allows us in each moment to awaken, to extract fire from the etheric waters. Fire relates again to the Spirit, it relates to the Father, so that every creation begins with that element. And this marks the first stage or first step in the world of Yetzirah, of creating a human being, is awakening fire, or the awakening of the Kundalini, which we talked about. Those three elements that are in struggle represent the three turns of the Kundalini serpent in the world of Asya at the base of the spine. 3.5 turns, because I'm incomplete. That fire is asleep and it's trapped in the water. So of course, we look at water and go, well, there's no fire here. But we have to utilize the 3 dimensions of self-observation with transmutation, and we liberate the fire from the water. So just like in, as we said, this tree becomes this scale balance. And as we find balance, we awaken. And in the physical realm, we said in Asya, the tree of life represents the spine and the cerebral spinal nervous systems. There's 3 systems, this law of creation. And so in the world of Asya, we have this mechanism that allows us to wake up more, relax more. And so in the world of Asya, we have these 3 nervous systems: the cerebral spinal nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and the grand sympathetic nervous system. And to study this in depth, I advise you to listen to Judah's chakra course, because it relates directly, as you can see how it's attached to the spine and the relationship of that. In the world of Yetzirah, we have the organizational formative or formational elements of those 3 nervous systems, which are the mind, which we generally relate to the intellect, the emotion, and the motor, instinctive, sexual brain. These are 3 brains in the one body. So in relation to the physical world, as we said, it's a square, and it relates to matter. So we have the body with the mind, emotion, and then this brain of motor, instinctive, sexual matter. And the practice that I want to give, and what we'll work with in a moment, and I'm going to give you this visual because I find it very inspiring. You've probably seen this in relation to the judgment of Anubis, weighing the heart, or a canister containing the heart with the feather, to find balance, to see what was the value of our life. But for us to try to realize that is the goal. If we could strike perfect balance between our thinking and our perceiving and our emotion, we would have balance, we would have comprehension. So in the practice that I'm going to give us for the week, it's going to be a little more contemplative practice, and it's built on the relationship of those subject, object, location, but perceiving internally into the mind. And at first it's in blackness, and we'll guide it as a practice, but trying to notice continually where my heart is. So we take a leap. So in Gnosis, we expect, without expectation, that something is going to arise. When I balance or create some level of stillness, something is going to arise. It's either going to come from the being or come from inside myself. And it's very difficult to know which is which, generally, which is why it's so important to be in tune with the heart, the superior emotion. Because in that, we have the ability to comprehend. Intuition is the one sense that the ego, the desire, cannot get. We'll get more into the ego next week. But to use this as a practice, to imagine one scale is before us that we're perceiving, the second we're receiving. We're perceiving and we're receiving with the not expectation like I expect to see this, but the expectation that I will see something. And actually, even if I see blackness, I'm seeing something. But because what happens is images from above or below come very fast. In time, we can slow things down, and the key that Master Sanal gives us, it's so profound, which we'll talk about next week, is the key of drowsiness. To have a level of sleep, but a definition that I am not going to go to sleep, that allows images to come, and we can sometimes see them coming. But generally what happens is bam, bam, and it comes so quick that if we're not balanced between perception and reception, we see it and we're like, what was that? It was like, that was weird, because we only saw one face or one dimension to the thing that arrived that has multiple dimensions to it. So we need to keep in our practice that three-dimensional awareness, even in the darkness of the mind, so that I'm ready, so that when something emerges, I have a relationship and I'm able to feel it. So that's what we're going to talk about more, the next level of this in practice next week, to really connect with the consciousness and the spirit. But the last thing, again, would be amiss if we talked about the world of Yetzirah and did not talk about the holy creatures or the different angelic legion that live in the different planes. Now, we said before, each tree in each world is named or labeled differently. So the traditional, names that we gave relate to the tree of life, Malkuth at the bottom, Yesod, Hod, Netzah, as we go up the tree. But in this realm, it relates to levels of consciousness of beings. And the first, as you see at the bottom, first is the word Ishim. And this is fascinating because we talked about liberating the fire and understanding the relationship of Shin, that letter that looks like a trident, like a flame, relates to the element fire and is in the central point. And if we were to do another Hebrew lesson, it would be Yod, Shin, Ish, which means man. The masculine principle and the fire. Isha is Yod, Shin, and He, the feminine principle, woman. So that in essence is what a human being is. And our work is to become men and women, or human beings. Ishim, in is plural. So that is the first level of a human being that has initiated this awakening and has awoken the fire of the Kundalini. We can't go into that completely now, but we're giving the foundational elements of that. And that's why these two sphinx, on the left is the lion with the face of a woman and wings of the eagle. On the right, the Mesopotamian version, the left is Greek, has the body of a bull and the face of an individual and the wings of the spirit. It's spiritizing matter. And sometimes we see it, the complete form, which has the hind legs of a bull, the front of a lion or a big cat, the face of a human, and the wings of an eagle. Those are the four creatures that make the Merkabah of the Kabbalistic mysteries of the chariot, the Merkabah, which are these four lower worlds, Sephira, which is a crystallization of the fire in the physical body, which is the bull. The moving of that fire to the realm of a cherubim is to be have the face of a human being. To then bring that fire to the realm of the astral body, which is Beni Elohim, which means son of God or son of gods and goddesses. To be a child, a son or a daughter, a child of God, is to be a Beni Elohim, which then you have the claws or the front portion of the lion. And then to be the realm of an Elohim, to be a god or a goddess that we talked about in earlier classes, is to have the wings of the eagle. Those are the four beasts of Ezekiel's vision of the Merkabah, the chariot, because those four bodies represent the chariot that pulls the master, the Malachim, which is when one moves the fire and consciousness to the level of Tiferet, to be a Malachim, a king or queen of nature, to be a master of nature. And then the other realms are above, and I don't want to get into all of this, but for us, this is really important. Not that we know these names, but even in the, for instance, to be at the realm of the mind, the mental body crystallized, and Elohim, in the East, it's called a Buddha, which is another, a name for God for them. And so what this is, when these four bodies are created, it is the perfection of what's here at the top, the Chaya HaKadosh, which means the holy living creatures, which are those four beasts of Ezekiel, the four beasts at the very top of the tree that sit at the throne in the book of Revelation, that all they can do is sing praises to the divine. To have that level of proximity that you're in such awe. You have vehicles that can allow you to be at such proximity to the light of creation that all you can do is continually say how awesome this is. That's all you can say. Like, you want to say anything. And so in the book of Revelation and in other teachings, it's very similar that those four crystallizations, which are the same as the four gospels. And we're going to stop right now. The four gospels, Matthew. Where's my? Oh, there we go. Matthew, Mark, the lion, Luke, and John. And the fifth gospel is the gospel of Gnosis, which is the Christic gospel of the divine being formed that is illustrated in these four gospels. The same thing. We could also draw this relationship to the four zodiacal signs of Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio, which that had a different name back in the day, and it was symbolized by the eagle. It represents this giant cross in the heavens, which we've probably shown in the astrology. So So this is where we're going to end, and this is Ezekiel riding his 4 creatures with 2 little extra cherubims. And we'll take a quick break, and we'll do a practice.
Transition to the practice.
We're going to transition to the practice, but let's stand up, take a quick break, take a quick breath. I'm going to take a quick lap, and I'll be right back. If there are any questions that...
Yeah, if you want to put any questions into the chat, then or wait to ask them, we'll have the practice that'll probably take us up to the end of the time, so we can stick around if there are more questions at 9, and we'll stick around for those for anybody who can stick around. Also, we're available in email, or you can carry them over to next week. So there's a question about the medicine that Gnostics practice, and maybe we can address that at the very end. It's a big question, but
yeah, if you have the ability to stick around after, we can talk about those things. And also, and we'll get into this next week, the relationship of angels and what that actually really means, because we're going to look at, because not all angels are created equal, as we may believe. So we'll talk about that and questions after. We want to make sure we have time to do the practice and explain the exercises, which we're waiting for Judith to come back. And then we get comfortable. You can continue stretching for a moment. The meditation is going to be 4-part breathing and transmutation that we talked about. I'll go through this in the practice so you'll know. Our nightly practice is, again, to fall asleep praying for intimate connection with your Divine Mother, and notice resistance as it arises and let it go. Maintaining balance of heart and mind, which we'll do in this practice. And of course, the observation is to carry out the practice of subject-object location, attempting not to identify.
and we recap this. If we have your information, we do recap this in email and post it on Meetup. But if we don't have your info and you would like a recap, and sometimes we'll make other announcements, then email us, gnosis@gnosisbc.com.
Okay. So fortunately, we've been working to divide our attention all class, and so now we just re-establish that in our awareness with our eyes closed. So our objective is to sit and feel in our senses, us as the subject, in our emotional torso area, feel ourselves. In the space that we are. And we add to our objective breathing, which is very natural and normal. That's why the breath is always helpful to keep us in the present moment. But we're going to breathe, as we taught last week, 4 parts in a relaxed way, allowing the energy, the matter, the creative matter or the fire that's in the waters to rise up the spine. With the inhalation, we pause with our attention at the third eye, between the eyebrows, and then exhale and send that energy into the heart. Pause and continue focus on this, and we will do it as a breathing exercise, not as a hum saw like we did before. Just feeling the relaxing movement of the breath itself as it rises all the way up, and we feel the lightness of the air, that it fills us like in the bathtub we talked about. Our lungs are full. We exhale, and we feel the material weight of this body, and we're integrating spirit and matter very fundamentally there. With the inhalation of prana and breath, energy, feel the lightness, and then exhale, sending it to the heart and feeling the matter of the body. Continue for a few breaths. So the objective again is to breathe and relax. Allowing the movement of this life force from the breath and from our creative organs to move through the body. Rise, fall. We can add with this our state, joyfully receiving the inhalation, understanding with it comes life. Allow this to be a grateful moment. And upon the exhale, feel the relaxation reverberate in the body, that pleasant sensation. And again, we feel thankful with each relaxation, each exhalation. And now as the breath is rising and falling, let us fix our attention at the tip of the nose, a point that does not move. As we witness through the sensations, the breath pass through the nostrils, and still we stay attentive to the nose. And again, the breath passes out the nostrils, and we stay attentive to the tip of the nose. Again, with that grateful attitude, as if this is the first breath we have ever breathed. And we don't want to miss a delectable sensation. And the attitude upon the exhalation, as if it may be the last we will ever breathe, and we don't want to forget a single aspect. If a thought or a feeling arises, We notice it, we allow it to enter in, but we don't let our attention be diverted, distracted away from what we're doing. And if our attention does get distracted, when we realize it, gently but firmly, decisively, we return it to the objective. Breathing with attention, and again, awareness as the subject of ourselves, feeling ourselves, but our attention focused at the tip of the nose. And the third part of the practice, that at home when we practice this, we can expand until we feel relatively unmoved by thoughts or feelings or sensations, and our attention is strong, that we notice but we're not distracted, not diverted, that we now then move that point of attention into the mind, looking into the mind, obviously physically at this point, with our attention. And again, the key is looking. Seeing will come, but look. Now, like the image, we have now relatively a calm, quiet mind. And our attention, but our awareness is pulled back into our heart. And we try to keep an equal balance between perceiving and receiving. We could say thinking and feeling, but we're not really thinking, we're just looking. And in this, we balance the mind with the heart. Feeling ourselves in our heart, perceiving in our mind. We may notice if a thought or a tension in the body or a memory arises, those two scales kind of oscillate up and down. We lose the balance. It's like the waters of the mind, the waters of the psychology, the psyche, consciousness makes ripples. We can't violently calm water. We just stop making waves. This is the objective. The waves will stop. Will quiet. And in this way we work with the world of Yetzirah. And through this we shape and form a quiet, peaceful mind, an open heart, a relaxed body. Which in turn will transfer through the glands of the nervous system, light, electricity, vibration, hormones, all the chemicals that move and refuse and reform to start to create the Ishin, a human being that is not under control of the elements, but controls the elements. Not with force or violence, but with consciousness, balance, equilibrium, so that in each scenario and situation we come, we carry out the same practice to create balance, equilibrate the scenario, and allow an electromagnetic force to rise up towards the being. In light, returning the light that we've been given. With a thank you. Which brings to an end tonight's meeting. And we thank you so much for all of those that traveled from so far to their desk or couch to be here with us. We thank you sincerely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
And again, if you would like
Thank you.
for questions, that would be perfectly fine. I'm going to step up for a second.
Yeah, for those who need to go, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you maybe Saturday. We have a special Mother's Day weekend topic and practice on the Divine Feminine and our relationship with her Saturday at 10 a.m. And the Zoom link is on our website and the classes page and on Meetup if you're connected to us through Meetup. And otherwise, we hope to see you again next Thursday. And if you have any questions, then we're here. Hi, Don.
Thank you, Judith. Jeff, good night.
Thank you.
Peter,
Thank you,
good
Judith,
night.
Jeff.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
There's, oops. Some chats up there.
In here.
Mhm. Thank yous. Thank yous and good nights. All right. So there was the question around medicine that that Gnostics use.
Well, I suppose it depends on what you're trying to treat, but back to what we said about in the beginning, that the purpose is awakening consciousness. So in that, we each have our passions and loves in the physical body and pursuits. And so the first is the healthiest, best food that we can find. That's, let your food be your medicine. But not all, yeah, but it's difficult to know exactly what's right. So to be aware of that and try to find balance in eating according to your ethics and according to your budget and all of those elements. Now, Master Samael has a book called The Occult Medicine and Practical Magic, and that deals with this specifically, and it talks about different plants and elementals, because each element has an elemental. Each plant has an intelligence. So just like we're here to awaken our consciousness, each of the elementals are here either moving towards that path or here to support that. So they have their own intelligence and healing. So ideally, we would be able to communicate with the plant and go into the internal worlds and do that. But we all have to with budget, with time and all those elements, make the decisions for ourselves which medicines to use, and either the more natural or the more necessary, and always have to balance those things.
Mm-hmm. And then some fundamental elements, of course, are how we're taking care of our energy. So that's very important. So part of the medicine that we practice is to work with the chakras, for instance, that are these receptors or portals of energy that receive etheric energy from the atmosphere that's there and available to us, and the practice of what we talk about, non-identification. So not becoming consumed by our lower emotions and excessive or lower types of thinking. So to not be consumed and identified with matter, the matter of lower emotions, or the matter of the mind, or the matter of material matter, to not be underneath all of that. And so that's very important, that we spend our vital values in the different centers, in the mental, emotional, physical, instinctive, and sexual centers, through being hyperactive, overactive, and identified in those centers. And so we waste and expend a lot of vitality, vital force, vital energy through these, what are not, we wouldn't say normal, but common behaviors. And so we squander the health that we naturally would have through those kind of behaviors. So the psychological work is medicine. The energetic work, such as the work with the chakras and the practices that we give, and absolutely the transmutation practice, are all forms of Gnostic medicine as well. So we have to have that foundation, because we can't make up for abusing the centers with any other kind of medicine.
And in essence, I think that the real answer to this question is that every Gnostic would probably more or less agree with is, no matter what comes up in our life, conditions, sicknesses, whenever taking any medicine, always trying to understand the psychological components, because in the world of Yetzirah formation, everything that's material is formed, and also the esoteric components. So that generally, if something arises in your life, we want to comprehend and try to work psychologically and esoterically, not just physically. So that goes for any medicine that we're going to take. If we're trying to treat anything in the physical world, we have to psychologically be working and esoterically be working. We'll talk more about the esoteric component next week.
And we have to weigh it. We have to weigh it. I this week had a sinus issue arise, which is kind of if I'm ever to get a little sick, that's usually where it hits me. And so I've even had a naturopath say, well, if you need a Mucinex every now and then, which is like a pharmaceutical for sinus issues, you can take one. And I haven't taken any unnatural medicine in over a year at all, like nothing, probably a couple of years. And so I took one just to see what that would be like. Took a Mucinex because there was just so much mucus, right? And I needed to kind of deal with my work day. So I went and took it, and it was in the morning, and I was kind of subtle, and I was still doing my practices, and I noticed my vital energy just drop a little bit. I noticed it right away. And so I have to weigh that, I have to weigh to get through what I feel that I need to do right now to the best of my ability. I've made that trade. I made that trade-off. So we all have to kind of weigh it for ourselves, what we're going to do. And because we're in an imperfect state, in an imperfect world, so it's not going to be perfect. And we each have to calculate that for ourselves. But there's a synthetic medicine, and like Jeffrey was saying, those medicines that isolate one element out of its holistic natural element, and then synthesize it, then mimic nature even worse. It does rob something from our vitality, but sometimes that there's a trade-off that is worth it, that we need to calculate for ourselves. So there's a lot we could say about it.
Yeah. That's why certain foods, natural medicines and natural foods, have vitality in it, because it's a complete organism, in that way. And things that don't have to then take your vitality to operate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we weaken the liver, for instance, but if this pain I'm suffering is so great that I'm in so much anguish that it's creating a lot of other problems that I can't overcome, then that might be a trade-off that I make for a while. Yeah. But then work to overcome,
pray,
to come out of that.
Meditate.
Yeah. So prayer is medicine.
That was a long answer.
That was a long answer. Yeah.
I hope the person's still here. I don't know.
They are. But great question. Thank you. Okay, so that's it from the chat. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to continuing Saturday and also next Thursday. And have a great rest of your evening, everybody. Good night.